Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Flipping the Burrow podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories of energy leaders across our industry and find out more about their career and life journey. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing Teresa Thomas. Teresa is Vice Chair, U.S. Energy and Chemical Leader at Deloitte. She has more than 20 years of experience and has served in a variety of leadership roles in the energy industry. Teresa uses her industry and technical expertise to assist companies as they manage shifting market dynamics and regulations, new reporting standards, and capital market transactions in their transition to provide ever cleaner and more cost-effective energy. In 2023, Teresa was named Hearts Energy's 25 Most Influential Women in Energy, and she currently serves on the board of The Rose, a leading nonprofit women's breast health organization. Teresa, we are so excited to finally get to have you on the podcast. It's been a long time coming, and we're just happy to finally have the opportunity to feature your amazing story. So thank you for saying yes and coming on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. I am thrilled to be here. I know it's been a long time in scheduling, but I'm really excited to be here with you both.
So Teresa, let's get a little bit into your background, what life was like growing up in Detroit as the oldest of 4 kids. And your father was a truck driver who also owned a renewable energy business, which is really interesting because back then it wasn't cool like it is now. So it'd be cool to know a little bit about what that was. And how did your upbringing shape your leadership style and work ethic today? Just bring us back to growing up in Detroit.
Well, thanks. I feel really lucky to have been born into the family that I was born into. And I'm Houston based now, but I was Midwest born. So born in the Detroit area, and I'm the oldest of 4. And that's right. My father was a truck driver and actually started his own business. And back then, it was really not thought about as a renewable energy company, but was really used cooking oil that was more a recycled product or a byproduct business that now is actually a commodity that gets used for renewable energy, which is pretty fascinating given I'm in the energy industry. I can't say that was by design. I can't say I chose the energy industry because of that, but I certainly did learn the value of hard work and being pretty scrappy and innovative in problem solving. When you're a small business owner, you're responsible for a lot of things. And so you roll up your sleeves and get into it. And so that's probably something that I learned and grew from. I'm also the first generation college student. So there was a lot that I was navigating for the first time for our family.
So I think what was interesting is you told me, you're one of 4, your husband's one of 4, and you have 4 children, which I think
Yes.
is, you were born for the chaos at home and just all the personalities and people together. But I think that was a cool part of your story. Tell me a little bit about being a first, generation college student. That can be difficult. We've spoken to a few people where mom and dad didn't go to college. So even prepping to get into it, the SATs, the testing, how to apply to college, there's just so many stories of it's harder at the end of the day. So how did you navigate that? And how did you know that you wanted to go to college? Because that you obviously didn't see that in the family.
Well, first, I will acknowledge the process is, I believe, a lot more difficult and more competitive now than it was then, or at least maybe I was naive then and didn't stress out on now. Now that I have 4 children that I have helped to navigate and that have gone through college or are currently still in college, I have 2 that have graduated and have their own careers, and I have 2 still in university. It is a really stressful process to navigate. I can't say I felt that stressed as I was going through it. My parents and the coaches and mentors that I had just instilled confidence in me that I could do probably anything that I set my mind to. I needed to just ask questions, feel a little bit brave to explore things and do some research on my own. But when I did, I found most people were pretty welcome to answer questions, even if it wasn't coming from my immediate family. There was a network around me who could help me navigate. And really, I just needed to have some initiative to start asking questions and then take advantage when people wanted to help me to accept the assistance or guidance or coaching that they would offer. So at the time, it probably didn't feel that overwhelming to me. In hindsight, I'm really proud of myself that I didn't think much about it. I just knew I wanted to do it. It would provide a good path and maybe better opportunities for me. So it seemed like a natural extension of my energy.
I love these kind of stories when you're first generation, especially because you kind of hold that path for all the generations after you, including your children. Which, when we talk about career and motherhood, you mentioned when we spoke that the energy industry found you, which I'd really love to kind of understand a little bit more about that and what that means to you, and how you were able to immerse yourself in the energy industry whenever you first started, as well as you had some significant life changes that happened during the period too. And we always like to highlight the fact that, being a single mom can be very difficult, especially when you're navigating your career. Massiel and I both had single moms growing up. And for us, it was a huge impact on our lives of like who we wanted to become, not just as moms, but also in our career and our ambition. How did these personal experiences kind of influence you? And how were you able to manage even that transition going into the energy industry? And were they able to support you during these times where you kind of found yourself, you know, single and having to also do the mom duties at home, and balance that new cycle for you?
Well, again, a time where good things happened to me, and I was relatively lucky that the energy industry found me. I say that I found it by accident, but it was on purpose that I stayed. I started right out of college and working for Deloitte in their audit practice, and I was assigned to an energy company. So it's not like I picked it. I could have been assigned to anything, but I was assigned to an energy company and then continued to be assigned in that industry. And when I started getting exposure to the purpose and anchoring to what it really, the industry powers for the world and the relevance, which is just increasingly relevant today. But even then, I appreciated the noble work that the energy industry did. I was really drawn to that because I'm somebody who gets pretty excited on the why. Why are we doing things? What is the basis of conclusion? I have an analytical mind, and I love when we can anchor to something you feel great conviction in. So that's probably what got me to stay and has helped my path evolve. You mentioned life changes. One thing's for sure, life evolves in ways that will surprise us. And whether that is because we are making necessary choices that we didn't expect to make, or things were chosen for us. People evolve because of changes in their family circumstances, because of sickness or something like that. And in those circumstances that maybe we wouldn't have expected to be living through, you find that your perspective on priorities or what is important comes crisply into focus. And when I was navigating a big life change for me, thinking about the priority of who I am in my career and what I wanted to do, still very important, but really appreciating that I I'm my kid's only parent. And so that, my daughter was only going to be 4 once. You don't get another try at that. And so it really did shape how I thought about navigating career and maybe the pace at which I felt that I could successfully climb. And then really maybe just starting to ask questions about, could my path and the direction that I took look different from others who I saw successfully navigate, because they weren't me. They didn't have my fact pattern. And so I needed to make choices and balance things, work life integration that was uniquely mine. I think when those life circumstances happen, it does give you a moment to reflect on, what do you want to prioritize? Because we only have so many hours in the day, and what will make me feel most satisfied when I'm going to bed at night. No, I can't say that every hour I choose the right thing, because I certainly haven't. But if that's our aim and we're trying to focus on that, I think generally we'll find ourselves going in the right direction.
Teresa, what was your prior? I would love to know, like, when you talk about the priorities, how did you like level them? What were they at that time? Just to give the listeners a little bit more detail on what you mean by prioritization.
Sure. Well, I grew up as one of 4 kids. And so big families always been an important part of who I am. I had very active extended families and networks. And so that's always just been woven in the fabric of who Teresa is, for better or for worse. That's just part of who I am. And so I'm an ambitious person, and I had goals. I was that first generation college student. So I obviously wanted to make good use of that money and time. And so I expected to build a career and progress and challenge myself to grow. But when those things felt like they were starting to, were they competing with one another for an hour of my day? Or how much time was I invested on thinking about how to get better at one or another? They're not mutually exclusive. So don't hear me say that. But the shape of the day and how you spend that time, I started to appreciate that um, a successful career, if I wasn't able to be the parent that I personally wanted to be, and that's not a reflection on other people who make choices that are different, but given my family's circumstance, what I thought I needed to do, I started thinking about trade offs. What it could make sense for me to work a reduced workload and have a schedule that allowed me to be at home more when my daughter was younger. And it afforded me a chance to be a little more creative at the time. Reduced workloads were not really a thing that was commonly practiced or that even the firm socialized or marketed. I can't say that nobody was going out of their way to say, hey, why don't you try this? Maybe this would help you transition with being a parent and what you're going on. That was my idea, just because I thought there's got to be a way where I feel good about this. And it really did take a little bit of courage to look different. And that meant my progression was going to probably look different from others. But I had to be okay with that because I was my kid's only mom. And that's what made sense to me.
There's so much to unpack, but I just love everything that you've mentioned because it's important, I think, at the end of the day, to realize, and I think you mentioned this, and I want you to expand a little bit on everybody's like in this rush to get to a certain place by 30, by 40. But every time we talk to leaders like yourself, it's like focus on today, deliver today. Most of the time, and I want to go back to you actually left Deloitte and you went to a different kind of company for 10 years. So there was a big gap. I think people look at your success at Deloitte and just think like she was in Deloitte her whole life, but you actually left. And part of it was you mentioned that representation does matter. And a lot of the partners, which is, in companies like Deloitte, that's like the big thing, right? In finance, partners didn't look like you. They didn't look like a big family. They didn't look like, what the values that you held. So, and I think a lot of us do this where we look at the top and we're like, nobody looks like us. And so we move on. And so early on in your career, you left, and because of the timing of having your first child, et cetera. But then just circumstances of life, you got remarried, you moved to Houston, and then you found yourself at Deloitte again, just through talking to people, and they're like, come back to Deloitte. And you did. And I remember you said you thought you were going to be there for like a year or two. And it's just so cool to see now, 12 plus years later, and your role super successful in Deloitte. And so I remember I asked you, and this is kind of what I want you to answer, was what happened in that decade of you being at Deloitte that made you differentiated and successful to get to where you are today after that career break, and even your workload that you mentioned, that your path took a little bit different. You did like 60% of the time and then 75% of the time, things that, to your point, a lot of people weren't doing because they were rushing to get to a certain place, but you took a different path. It was slower, but look, you got to where you are today. Kind of like the turtle wins at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I've ever reflected and thought about myself as a turtle, but I like it in terms of the willingness to stay to it and be the stability of it. I guess the constant in there was a lot of change, and so I will say the reason that I left Deloitte the first time was because I didn't see myself as a partner. That wasn't my career ambition. I didn't, and because I thought in order to be a successful partner, you needed to look a certain way, or your kind of life needed to be packaged a certain way. And I thought that wasn't mine. That wasn't going to be my life's choice, my family circumstance. And at the time, I believed that being in industry would be a better fit for my work-life integration. I had a fantastic run in industry, and I worked at an energy company, still in energy. So all very on purpose and staying. I worked with fabulous coaches and leaders that gave me a very different view from the leaders and coaches that I had benefited from early in my career. It just rounded me out in a different way. It gave me exposure to things and circumstances. And certainly while I was doing that, I didn't think this will enable me to go back and be a partner. every day I was just trying to be really awesome and, quite frankly, extraordinary at the thing I was doing. Whatever that was, it was opening new opportunities and doors for me. So when I needed to move to Houston, I quite frankly wasn't even looking to come back to Deloitte. If I'm being really honest and transparent, I was having a conversation with a colleague about, I'm not sure what I'll do. I'm thinking about it. I have this move that I'm balancing, and it was suggested, well, would you come back? And I had a great run there, so I love the culture, I love the values. I just wasn't sure that there was a long-term gain for me, because still in my head, I didn't see myself as a partner, because I was a mom of a big family and my role there was really important. And so I came back, and like you said, I thought, well, we'll do this for a year or two and I'll do a good job. I'll learn some things and that will enable me to like sort it out. And I got here and appreciated that the lens that I had benefited from while being in industry does give me a different take. It gives me a street cred that maybe I wouldn't have had if I didn't have that industry experience. And when I was fueled with the what I could enable in helping clients, and also start to model for the firm that leaders could look really different than they had in the past. And not that I want leaders to look like me. I want them to look like what they need to look like for themselves. And I found a really powerful platform that I felt good about. So it was in energy, the most relevant industry out there, and it was in a space and at a firm that really believed in the values that made me feel good about working hard on something.
I really like that you pinpointed not being a carbon copy of like the other people in leadership roles, and defining that you can also be different in the way that your skill set is and your leadership style. You also mentioned something that I'd like to dig into, which is you talked about coaches, sponsors, mentors. These are all like key things that we always hear in like special leaders like yourself, where they really pumped you up in a time maybe where you didn't have the same vision as they did for where your career path journey would go. What is some key advice that you might have gotten from a coach or a sponsor or even a mentor about your career? But more importantly, like how to envision that next step for you, maybe when you didn't think you were ready. Anything that you can give the listeners that are kind of maybe in that spot where they also want to strive to do more, but maybe don't have that same vision for themselves, but need some advice on what kind of skill sets can they put in place, or who can they reach out to in order to feel like confident enough to move forward in a leadership position?
I was so fortunate to have people that cared about me, and sponsors and coaches. And I'd say if you find yourself lucky to have someone around you that's willing to invest in you and coach you, take advantage of that, because what a gift that is. And if you're not sure how to make good use of it, that's okay. You can say that too. Just developing that relationship. Probably one of the things I would say, which was so impactful and powerful in those coaches and mentors, was that they really encouraged me to be me. When there was a period of time where I thought success needed to look like somebody else, or what others were doing, or the pace at which they were doing it. Macy had mentioned that the path that I took looked longer. And one of the things that I reflected on was when I relaxed into my own pace and finding my path that was right for me, without the urgency to mirror someone else's and competing with others around me. There's always, competition at work. I just meant in terms of getting to the next level or getting to the next stage. When those coaches would encourage me just to reflect on what can you do, what's uniquely Teresa that was making me stand out, and really focus on using that, I feel like I was much more successful than when I was striving with an urgency of trying to model or be something that I'm not. I'm only going to be like the second best somebody else. But I could be the best Teresa if I focused on that. And there was something unique about me if I was authentic and brought it forward. And those coaches really helped me to, I think, feel confident on the value of that, and even when it looked different from others. And so I'd encourage other, young leaders that are thinking about this, really reflecting on what makes you uniquely you, And how can that enable the organization that you're in? How can you use that as a team leader and a coach or a program lead? You'd probably be surprised that it might not be the things that everybody thinks about. There's probably something in there that you'll uncover that would really give momentum to greater success.
I love that you share that. And just at the end of the day, being authentic. And you even said it like, Teresa, just be you. And you could be the best Teresa that you can ever be, but the second best of anything else. So I think that's, key to the podcast. If there's anything to take away, is just be yourself, because that's how you can be successful. Um, let's talk a little bit on just feedback. And this is something that we always like to ask, but as women, we do get a lot of feedback. And sometimes I think it's good to take it. I guess you need to know who it's coming from, on whether you're gonna take the feedback and actually act upon it, or take it and then again say, is this me? And maybe this is me or not, right? I remember when we asked you about it, you mentioned that you had received a little bit of, difficult feedback early on in your career about, Teresa, like, you need to be nicer in your approach and even how you maybe deliver a message. And you took some time to reflect on it. Can you bring us back a little bit to that? And, how, if you get feedback today as a leader, let's say from a younger person or something, I don't know, just putting a scenario, how do you look at feedback today as a leader?
Well, feedback is absolutely a gift. And I know we don't often think about that as it's coming, especially if it's constructive. Right. And I actually remember exactly where I was sitting and exactly the color jacket I was wearing when the leader shared with me, you were absolutely right in what you were presenting as, the conclusion. But you might want to, my interpretation of what he was saying was, be nice in presenting it. And I remember thinking, like, what? I'd always proud, I still have the leadership philosophy that having the hard conversation, having it early, having it often if necessary, is really in everyone's best interest. It's interest in the project's interest, in the person that you're coaching, your leader's best interest, whatever it is. Absolutely. So I wondered whether I was being encouraged to shy away from speaking the truth in the context of our objectives. And that really wasn't it. What the individual was sharing was that, like, so much of the message is in the packaging. And if we miss on the packaging of what we're presenting, we're going to undermine the real content. And so it did really force me to think about, is there a more effective way that I could present hard feedback or conclusions that others would come by, and really think about alternate angles that the audience would be hearing it in. I know I am much better for that feedback. I think it has allowed me to reflect and deliver hard messages with grace that maybe I didn't have, or maybe I intended to, but I maybe didn't think about it as thoughtfully as I had. I was very focused on the content versus the manner of delivery. And I really appreciate that feedback now. Today, if somebody gives me feedback, I can't say I always want to hear it in the moment. I mean, we're human, especially if you're working hard on something. But I do sincerely try to reflect from the position they're in. And not everybody's feedback carries the same weight. And so that's something for our leaders listening and to, thinking about. Not everyone has the same weight as your actual leader or a friend or a family member or a colleague. And so really to think about, what can I learn from this? How much weight I apply to it should be in direct relation to what their role is in measuring success of the objective, whether that's at home or at work, whatever it might be. And so I think you got to think about both of those things when you're reflecting on feedback.
I love how you kind of went into depth about not just taking everybody's feedback, but also kind of analyzing it. What does it mean to you? How should you utilize it? And then, moving forward with it, and also providing feedback to others too, just because it is helpful in everybody's leadership style to also understand how other people around them feel. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. I would really like to ask you a question to close, and it's really got to do with success. You throughout your career, even speaking to you now, like, you have definitely been a change maker. You have followed your intuition as Teresa. You did what you thought success would look like for you. And we feel that in today's day and age with social media and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all these things, the younger generation's having a lot more difficult time trying to define success. They hear it from all different outlets. Success is working for yourself. Success is being an entrepreneur. And it's more or less divvied away from success is having a great corporate career, which is, in my view, a great vision for success. What advice can you give to those that are struggling with that? Because it's so hard when all the noise around them is so loud. What should success look like for them? And how can they find that inner peace with what I'm doing is right, no matter what, the social media might say or what mom and dad might say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I'd say first, unplug. I mean, I think the amount of time and attention that all of us spend attached to screens and allowing mediums and platforms influence us versus merely informing. And I think there's a real difference in using technology and platforms to inform and use as a data point, not necessarily a trend, not necessarily drive and influence. So unplug to stabilize. What do I really think as important? It's good to get feedback from around us. It's good to pay attention to what's happening in the world for sure, because you really can't be impactful without knowing where you are and what's happening for sure. But to not allow it to swing us around as easily when you're sturdy on whether you call it your leadership philosophy, what your value set is, what the things that you feel most proud of when you close your eyes at night, or you would feel most disappointed in. Those are direction setting for you. And not every day everybody gets really deep and zen. So I'm not suggesting that. But if you feel pretty anchored and have a good sense of that, put it on your phone as a list and bring it up and remind you. Use a mantra, whatever it is, to anchor you occasionally if you're wondering if your compass is off for you. Those are what I would suggest have worked for me. And I mean, even today, when I go into a hard meeting or I'm making a difficult decision that I'm not sure of, to just pause and reflect on some really anchor tenets that I have. Does this decision either way influence what I choose or where I go? Sometimes not. And then that makes it a little bit easier and takes pressure off. But sometimes it's a good guide to then help me make a tough choice.
I like that you mentioned the notes part, because I have to say, and I think Massiel for a while had it on the back of her computer too, where we had like a list of like the 10 commandments of like what we believe in like leadership styles should be, that we got from one of the guests that came on the podcast. And I think that's such a great reflection, because so many times, and honestly, even when I still see it today, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what I believe in, no matter what other people say. So I think that's such a great key advice. And importantly, we have notes easily on our iPhone, so you can easily jot down what you're feeling and what you're thinking. So Teresa, I think that was absolutely amazing advice. And for those listening, I think it's something very easily accessible to them. And you weren't, going on this outlandish, thing that somebody would have to do and go and buy and purchase. It's a very easy thing to do in order to align your values. So thank you for sharing that, Teresa.
For sure. I have a note in my phone that says leadership philosophy, which really sounds fancy, and it's not. It's simply a bunch of bullets that I hold true.
I love that, Teresa. Thank you so much for spending time with us on the podcast today. I really enjoy your journey, just because coming from first generation college grad to really ambitious in the energy space, having the energy space, as you said, found you, but also saved you a bit. It's just so refreshing to hear how positive the energy industry has been for you in your career. So thank you for sharing such great feedback, and also sharing those hard moments. Being a single mom is difficult, and you did have those moments throughout your career and you were able to overcome them and stay authentic to yourself, which is something that we definitely want our listeners to hear and hold value in, because being your authentic self is ultimately the best way to success in your career. So thank you so much for sharing that, Teresa.
Absolutely. What a joy it was to be here with you both. Thank you for the opportunity and the conversation.
And if you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. You know where to find us. Anything at flippingthebarrel.com, Flipping the Barrel on LinkedIn, Flipping the Barrel on YouTube. It's pretty easy. So please stay tuned and catch us on the next podcast.